Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Mostowy, and I am a natural resource specialist with the Southwest Conservation District. And today I'm going to talk to you about groundwater. And this presentation is going to include an intro to groundwater. I'll talk about groundwater contamination, and I'll also talk about a professional application of studying groundwater. So as you all know, the water cycle describes the movement of water from the ocean to the atmosphere and then returning back to the ocean. And as you can see here, groundwater plays a large role in the returning of water back to the ocean. So groundwater is basically water that saturates or fills in subsurface material. And that subsurface material can include unconsolidated deposits such as sand or gravel or bedrock through fractures. And it differs from surface water because the surface water simply is just the waters in streams, rivers, ponds, etc. So there's some terms that are important to understand when studying groundwater. They include infiltration, which is the physical movement of water through the ground, and recharge, which is the actual water that infiltrates through the subsurface. And aquifer is the zone that's capable of holding or producing groundwater. And artesian describes groundwater that's under pressure, which allows it to rise in a well naturally. And it's kind of a confusing term, so I also included a YouTube video that allows the elaboration of this concept. And also there's hydraulic gradient, which is the measure and change of groundwater pressure that determines the groundwater flow direction. So porosity is the percentage of open space between unconsolidated material, and permeability is the capacity for a fluid to actually move through the material. And permeability can be primary, which is the flow through the material matrix, or secondary, which is the flow through cracks or fractures. So groundwater flows from high pressure to low pressure, and when groundwater intersects or meets with the surface water, it mixes and takes on the path of the surface water itself. It's measured through wells or piezometers that are drilled and intersect the groundwater, and it's mapped just like surface contours on a topographic map. And if you want to learn more about how topographic maps and contours are drawn, you can check out this YouTube video here. And the rate of flow depends on the permeability, which again is the ability for the fluid to move through a material. So groundwater flow can change naturally or anthropogenically. So naturally, changes occur due to changes in precipitation or input of water, or anthropogenically through pumping of a well, which causes the water level to change and form a cone of depression, as seen in this image here, which can affect the direction of the flow. So it's important to understand how groundwater works because it allows you to see, it allows you to understand groundwater contamination. So approximately a third of Connecticut's drinking water is from the groundwater. And here in the state, we have a long history of industrial activity. And as you know, the earth is not always an effective filter. So awareness of groundwater contamination wasn't made until the 1970s, and some forms of contamination can last for many decades. So back when the Industrial Revolution started, up until the 70s, people weren't really being checked to see what was going on with the waste and how that was affecting the groundwater. And the remediation or cleanup is very expensive and always not effective. So in understanding groundwater contamination, we have a few terms that we use. So the source area is the origin of the contamination. And in this image here, it's the red spot. The contaminant concentration is the actual amount measured by lab analysis. The plume is the body of groundwater that's contaminated, and that's represented here in this entire blue colored area. And ISO concentration lines are contour lines in a plume map that shows areas of the same concentration. So there's two types of contaminants, they're inorganic or organic, and inorganic contaminants include metals, salts, radioactive materials, acids and bases, or fertilizers, and organic contaminants include oil and gas, cleaning solvents, pesticides and herbicides, cyanide, coal tar products, and sewage and manure. And there's a lot of common sources of contamination, and many of which we see every day, including gas stations, dry cleaners, auto repair shops, metal finishing and plating shops, power generation facilities, manufacturing facilities, and even textile manufacturing facilities. So there's certain people that study groundwater, including hydrogeologists, water resource engineers, environmental scientists, and many more. And they study groundwater in 3 phases typically, which include phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So phase 1 of the environmental site assessment allows you to get to know the site, and you do some in-house research, such as reviewing the environmental database, which provides information about any chemical spills or any movement of environmental waste to and from the site. And you also want to review the geographical information of the site, such as topography, the geology, the soils, and the current conditions of the surface and groundwater. And you also do site research, where you go to the state library and the Department of Energy and the town hall in which the site is located in, and basically find out who owned the property and match that up with any sort of environmental impacts that were going on at the time. So you want to find out who's accountable for what. And you also review the site by visiting it, and it's very important to ask questions to the people who are working there, the person giving you the tour of the site, and anyone else you may find useful, because not everything is always documented and sent to the state. And overall, your goal is to determine the potential areas of environmental concern to focus your study. So once you've done the phase 1, you can move on to phase 2, which is when you're physically going to the site and taking soil samples and water samples and looking for the sources of contamination. And what you want to do here is figure out the extent of the contamination and see if it's contained within the site or if it's impacting the groundwater and surface water and any of the surrounding sites. And if you haven't been able to narrow down your search for the contamination, you can do a phase 3 and further focus your investigation. So once you've done the phase 3, you can figure out ways to remediate or clean up the site. And you can do that one of 2 ways, which is wait for the contamination to go away over time or physically remove the contaminated material from the site. And these are just some of the tools that we use when doing some groundwater sampling. And this is a typical setup when sampling a well. So this here is a water level indicator, which is basically a really long measuring tape with a probe at the bottom. And once the probe hits groundwater, it beeps. This here is a geopump, which you connect tubes to and send down the well, and that's what allows you to physically extract the groundwater. This here is called a YSI, and it tells you field parameters such as pH, dissolved oxygen, specific conductivity, and many more things as you're sampling the well. And these here are your sample bottles, which vary depending on the type of analysis you're trying to do. So of course, there's challenges when working as a hydrogeologist, including safety and working with a large variety of people. And these are just some images that I came across regarding safety. So this here was an excavator that we had parked at a site overnight, and we came back the next day to find that it was vandalized, the window was broken. So we ended up having to call the police and sort of have them watch the site overnight. You're also going to find that you're working in very remote areas, so it's always important to let your project manager know where you are at all times and also check in with them to make sure you're okay. You're also going to have to deal with the weather or just nature, because after the hurricane season we've had over the last few years, trees have been coming down, and the trees also come down right next to where you're trying to sample. So it's very important to make sure you're always looking up before you set up. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about an example of a wetlands remediation project that I was involved in back when I was a hydrogeologist. So the site was a formal industrial facility here in Connecticut, and they had done an ecological risk assessment of the wetlands from 2009 to 2019. So it was a very extensive study. And they basically determined that there were areas that were contaminated and the contamination wasn't going away. So they concluded that the site had to be remediated or cleaned up. And from June of 2020 to November of 2020, we removed the impacted material from the wetland area and replaced it with cleaner material. So this here is a site sketch of where we were working. The areas in red here are streams that had to be excavated of the contaminated material and filled in with clean material. And the yellow patches are just soil areas that were determined to be contaminated as well. And this white line here is actually the Quinnipiac River. So by doing this wetland remediation, we were actually protecting the contamination, or we were actually protecting the Quinnipiac River from the contamination that was produced by the former industrial facility at the site. And this here is an aerial photo of the same exact image as before, but just shows that the area was in a heavily forested land. So we had some of our own challenges we had to deal with here. So my role in the project was to serve as the field geologist. I coordinated and instructed a construction crew daily. I coordinated site visits with personnel from the town of North Haven for erosion control inspections before digging. I had to write up meeting minutes for our construction progress meetings. And I also had to write up weekly reports that were reviewed by several people to submit to the town, just to make sure that we're in line with what we said we were going to be doing for this project. And I also had to coordinate the sampling of the excavated material and the sample pickup by the laboratory. So the way this project worked in general was that we started by clearing the trees within the area of excavation. Then we dug out the dirty soil and we had to keep digging and then backfilled it with clean material. And the dirty soil was kept in a stockpile, and we had to take samples of that soil to see exactly how dirty it was. And when you figure out exactly how dirty it was, you can figure out its end destination and eventually ship it away. So of course, there were some challenges. Like I mentioned, we were working in the woods. We had unexpected weather. I believe there was some sort of tornado that went through the North Haven area at the time. So that was pretty annoying to deal with. And then we also had to deal with some unexpected contamination. So as you remember here, this was one of the areas that we excavated and then backfilled with clean material. However, the lab analysis came back and said that there were PCBs in the soil. So we had to keep on digging and find out the extent of the PCB plume in this area. And when all said and done, we had to extend the area quite a bit. And this red here shows the original area that we had dug up. And as you can see, the plume actually went all the way back to the tree line. And figure that out, we just had to take primary samples and then secondary samples to show that the PCB concentrations were going down and showed the end of the plume towards the very back of this image here. So in the end, we wrapped up the project. We determined the extent of the PCB plume and shipped that material offsite. We did our final post-construction inspection, and we tallied up the actual cost of the project. And finally, we had groundwater wells installed so we can sample the groundwater and make sure that the material we backfilled with was actually clean and nothing dirty or gross was leaching into the groundwater. So overall, groundwater is important because it contains everything that runs off the surface before re-entering a major body of water. And it's important to understand how groundwater flows can affect the input of excess water and contamination to a larger body of water. And it's very important to know that it takes up a lot of work to clean and monitor groundwater. So it's important to collaborate with one another to keep it clean. Thank you.